Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Vladimir Miletic, and I'm the guy behind the BFRB Club and behind the webinars at BFRB Club. I just wanted to show my face in the beginning before we get started, since my last webinar was done without my webcam being on. And some of you who don't know me from before wanted to see what I look like. So here I am, alive. And now I will switch it off and begin sharing the screen, and I will start the webinar. Those of you who are VIP Lounge members, you have a direct way of contacting me. So maybe you can let me know whether or not it means anything to you if you actually see me while doing the webinar, if you want the little icon in the corner. Last time I got kind of 50-50 feedback that some people said that they didn't mind either way. Some people said they like to see me. Others said they only listen to the webinars anyway instead of watching them. So let me know what you think, and then I will adjust things accordingly. Anyways, let me now stop the webcam and turn on the presentation so that we can get started. So here we are. The topic for this month's webinar is habit reversal training. I was asked through the Ask Away function in the VIP lounge to talk about self-help specifically. And through back and forth with several of you, I decided that one webinar really doesn't cut it because you were interested in different aspects of self-help. So I decided to create a webinar in several parts. And this month in October, we'll talk about habit reversal training, so like the basic stuff. And then every other webinar will build on this. Let me give you a brief preview of what you will be able to hear from me today. Which first of all, we'll discuss a little bit about a more comprehensive view of self-help. And we will talk about how to approach self-help for BFRBs, like what would be an overall plan for this. We'll talk about what habit reversal training is. We'll talk about the limitations of habit reversal training, because this is a proven and tested intervention, but it's by no means a cure-all. So it has its, I would say, serious limitations as well that you need to know of. Then we will go through each of the stages of HRT, or at least in the way in which I adapt HRT for self-help. And we will then talk about how to best implement this and where to go next. So how to approach self-help for BFRBs. I propose a 4-step plan. Of course, this doesn't have to be done in consecutive steps. And in fact, you can do all of these together. It may be a little difficult because it's quite comprehensive, but these are the, let's say, the 4 levels at which addressing your BFRBs should take care of the problem comprehensively. Step 1 is to get to know your BFRBs and then to introduce replacement habits. And that's exactly what we will be talking about today. We always begin with these basic behavioral interventions when it comes to self-help, but also when it comes to psychotherapy, because it is, I'm not going to say easy because it's not easy, but it is a simple enough way to reduce the damage that your BFRB does. So to allow your skin to heal if you struggle with skin picking, or to allow your hair to grow back if you struggle with hair pulling. So that's why we start there. And also because it's empowering. It gives you a degree of control over something that presumably has been a problem for a while, and probably a serious problem since you're listening to this, and I assume you're also in the BFRB club. Once you have that done and under control, you can move on to step 2, which is kind of a bridge between deeper work and maintaining behavioral change. At this basic step, step 1, we address your BFRB as if it were a habit, or rather its habitual facet, its habitual aspect. But that's not the whole story, as most of you know. But in order to maintain that, and in order to go deeper, you need to develop these step 2 skills. That's discipline, patience, and self-compassion. And these are not just ways to be more diligent and successful with habit reversal. And it's not just a way to to kind of lay the groundwork for deeper emotional work. It's also a treatment in itself. Self-compassion and patience tend to actually decrease BFRBs themselves, just these two skills. Because what usually happens, and I believe I don't have to explain this for most of you, but I think it might be important or informative, at least for some of you, is that after that moment of pleasure, if you experience it, usually comes a lot of shame and guilt. And what we talked about last month in our webinar about the inner critic and the inner perfectionist, the inner critic tends to, surface in those moments and then throw all kinds of insults at you. So you feel bad, you feel guilt, you feel like a failure, you feel like you're harming yourself, all these sorts of things. Self-compassion is a direct antidote to this. And the truth is, a lot of the negative self-image that this creates actually facilitates further picking, and sometimes guilt itself is triggering. So self-compassion will remove a whole layer of triggers for you. So that's why step 2 is really important. It's not just like a in-between stage. The third step then would be emotional work, meaning developing tolerance to different difficult emotions, to whatever emotion triggers you. If it's overwhelm, restlessness, boredom, stress, sadness, guilt, anger, whatever it might be, developing tolerance, so a kind of state of non-reactivity. Furthering your awareness development, which is something that you start with in step 1, except that in step 3, we're kind of focusing and zeroing in on awareness of thoughts and emotions. This is also present, you will see, in step 1, but it is a process that takes a long time. So at step 3, we come back to it, and then we really dive into it. And then you develop a kind of understanding of your emotions. Every person has their own implicit theory of emotions. And a good part of body focused repetitive behaviors is this tendency to avoid emotions and all kinds of difficult feelings. And the reason why you avoid them is because of what they mean to you and what you think about them, or, put in different terms, what your implicit theory of emotions is. So when it comes to step 3, we develop a healthier approach to emotions and a new framework in which you can understand them so that they help you grow instead of triggering you to pick or pull. This in itself is quite a paradigm shift. It is something that you can do parallel to the rest, but because these webinars will address, each of these steps, then you either have to wait until I'm done with them or start with step 1 and then every month kind of check in and build on what you already have. And then step 4 would be unearthing fully the psychology beneath your BFRB and actually dealing with that issue. It's really hard to say. One of the questions that I've received after the September webinar is, oh, well, what causes me to have such harsh thoughts about myself, for example? It's really difficult to say, to give a generic answer to this, because every person's experience is different. And the way you think and the way you feel and the way you see the world actually comes from your personal experience. So it's really difficult to say what kind of work step 4 will contain. But what we can say already is the kind of methodology that will be necessary to employ to understand these topics. So we can describe a method through which you can come to this understanding. We can outline paths for healing. There are different ways to conceptualize step 4. And once we get to it, I will try to present several perspectives. So this webinar should come out early next year, unless you want me to add some other webinars in between these individual ones. But I will try to offer different perspectives, all of them adjusted for self-help, because my goal with this series of webinars is to make it accessible to you regardless of whether you can pay for therapy or if you actually even want to do therapy. So I want to make it a self-help approach, but I don't want to make it like a cheap pop psychology thing. I want it to actually be grounded in something solid and something that is workable. So let's see if I manage to kind of uh, to have that balance between offering something that is psychologically legitimate but also accessible enough to be applicable without a therapist, that is. Anyways, let's continue with step one. So what is habit reversal training? If this is what we do in step one, then let's see what exactly are we talking about here. So habit reversal is a form of behavioral treatment, and it's specifically designed to work for repetitive behaviors. So it's not some general type of psychology. It was specifically designed for repetitive behaviors and mainly for BFRBs. And when you look at the studies in terms of what form of therapy is most effective for skin picking or hair pulling, you cannot not see studies about habit reversal training. It's the oldest treatment specifically designed for this, and it's the most tested treatment. So if you struggle with excoriation disorder or with trichotillomania or with both, this is made specifically for that issue. Because it's a behavioral treatment, as the word suggests, it will address only the behaviors, but not necessarily the causes. It is very effective. It does its job well if it's implemented correctly. So in that sense, it really does work, and you can expect to see results. It's a rather simple intervention, at least theoretically, you will see, and you can use it without a therapist. I will, as I said, I will simplify it here in few easy steps. And some of the things that we will talk about in the step 2 webinar next month uh, will help you apply these skills even better. But here I will outline the procedure, right? Even though you can apply it on your own, it's very useful to have a group to work with or a partner to work with. When I say a partner, I mean someone who is working through the same issue as you are. Because habit reversal training requires diligence and devotion and compliance, you can't do habit reversal, once a week. Like it is something that has to become a daily activity for the foreseeable future. So in that sense, it really does require someone who's going to help keep you on track. This is why, among other things, the BFRB club is there, because every Friday you get a prompt where you assess your week, you read about other people's experiences, you can ask them questions, they can give you advice, they can keep you on track. And also, if you're in the VIP lounge, then you also get feedback from me. But it doesn't have to be the BFRB club. Of course, it can be anything, as long as you have someone that understands your struggle and is able to keep you in check. The goal of habit reversal training, so what we're trying to achieve by implementing this, is to replace your BFRB with a non-damaging behavior, and therefore, to allow your skin or hair to heal. So the goal is rather simple and I think easy to understand. Uh, Whenever you feel like picking or pulling, at the end of habit reversal training, you end up doing something else. Now, I will present a simplified 3-step version here because this is how you can use it for self-help. So this is the simplest version that works. Let's put it that way. You are welcome to add your own things. You can talk to other people in the club, see what they can recommend, what works in their experience, and then create your own customized path. But I will present something that, let's say, works for most people, right? For step 1, you need to set aside at least 1 or 2 months, depending on the insights that you already have before starting, presumably right now, and then also your motivation and your discipline. So if you do it every day, 1 to 2 months should be sufficient for you to reduce your picking or pulling significantly. Now, also, as you go through the whole process, it's best to have a notebook or a journal. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. You don't need to have stickers or expensive leather-bound journals, none of this. I mean, if it's going to make you more diligent and force you to use it, then by all means splurge and buy an expensive one, but it can be any kind of a notebook. It really doesn't matter. The reason for this is because there are many things you will see as I go through the specific steps that you have to do. There are things that you will have to write down: your impressions, your feelings, what works, what doesn't, what your thoughts are about the process. So it is good to have a dedicated journal of some sorts for this. Also, you can use a tracking app if you think that typing into your phone might make it easier for you to track your picking or pulling. I will explain why that is important. But first, let's see the three stages. This painting on the right obviously has absolutely nothing to do with HRT. This is just a painting by a painter that I like very much, Wilfred Lam. And there's an L missing in his first name between I and F here. Anyways, stage one is collecting information and building awareness. Then stage two is analyzing data and choosing replacement habits. That's the shortest stage, but it is really important. So in a sense, it's crucial for stage three, which is implementation. Stage one and stage three are the ones that last a long time. You can do stage two in about a day or maybe 2 days, depending on your time. So that's the fastest one, but it does require rigorous analysis and focus. Before we proceed and before I tell you how to go through each of these stages on your own, let's mention a few limitations of habit reversal training. Because I've been saying how effective it is, but I really don't want to give you the impression that this is the whole story. After all, even in this mini self-help plan that I've proposed, it's only one step out of four, and it's the first one. This is only a behavioral intervention, so it will reduce the damage that you do, but it will not resolve or even uncover whatever it is that's underlying, whatever underlying causes may be making you to pick or pull. I say only a behavioral intervention, and here in the slide it's under quotation marks because I really don't want to underestimate the impact it has, because it really is empowering and it reduces damage, no doubt there. But if you're hoping for some kind of profound psychological transformation, habit reversal training simply cannot offer that. It's as simple as that. So while you're doing step one, don't expect this, but also if you want this, it's perfectly logical and normal to want some kind of deeper work. Don't try to do everything at once. Like, start with the surface, start with habit reversal, and then move on deeper later on. Because if you try to do too many things at once, you are very likely to fail. I don't want to sound pessimistic, but I've been working as a therapist for well over a decade now, and I have seen time and time again that people try to, use 5 different approaches to deal with their picking or pulling, and then they end up failing at every single one of them. And then the takeaway message in the end is, well, after all, I cannot change. It is what it is. And it is not what it is. It's just that all these techniques that perhaps would have worked had they been applied correctly have just been used incorrectly. And then therefore you cannot expect to have a good outcome. So start with this. Even if I say to surface level change, start with this anyway. So one thing that might be useful is to combine habit reversal training with some form of stress reduction and anxiety management, just to make it more effective. Because these are very frequent triggers, and picking or pulling, BFRBs in general, have that self-soothing effect, and they help you cope with stress and with anxiety. And if you take that away from yourself as a resource, you will feel more anxiety and more stress. So you need something that will help you manage those as well. The most extreme example that I can think of from my own clinical practice is a client of mine who came to therapy specifically for one reason and one reason only, which is to change the habit itself. So she only wanted habit reversal training and nothing else. Uh, in the end, she was quite a diligent client, I have to say, and she implemented this to perfection. And she left therapy once she had resolved her issue. She was struggling with skin picking, and then she came back to therapy about 6 months later, but with a different complaint. When she came back to therapy, she said, "Well, I don't pick my skin anymore, so that's good. We conquered that problem. But now I have panic attacks. So I need you to fix my panic attacks." And it was the same, it turned out as we were working together that her panic attacks were only there because picking wasn't anymore. So she had no outlet for her anxiety, and she didn't know how to process those feelings or even how to connect to them. It was a client that was quite dissociated, so she wasn't really in touch with how she felt. And it was only when she started struggling with panic attacks, which were very intense and overwhelming, that she realized that there might be something to what I'm saying, that simply changing the habits isn't enough. So take that as a cautionary tale and learn from her experience. uh, Start with HRT, but don't stop there. So, as I said, habit reversal, especially in self-help form, when I work with clients, it's different because clients will come to therapy and they'll have me to hold them accountable, to discuss and analyze everything that they did right or that they did wrong, to see how they can improve, and that provides accountability in itself. When you go through the process alone, it is really difficult, because it's difficult to be patient and diligent and disciplined when you're going against how you feel. When every part of your body wants to pick or pull, it's truly difficult to say, well, instead, I'm just going to learn to use what I learned in habit reversal training. So consider finding an accountability partner, or at least if you're a member of the club, keep us posted all the time. There are people in the club that are active, that will help you. And when you feel like you're doing this with other people, it will be helpful. From time to time, I will organize groups as well. Uh, Stay on our mailing list. I will, when I organize the next one, I will let you know. And then in these groups, we meet in the period of 2 months, we meet 8 times and work through habit reversal together. And this tends to be quite a good experience, and it's quite effective. Although I have to say, it is kind of habit reversal enhanced with mindfulness. And I think maybe that's why it's so effective. But it's also the group, because the group support and kind of guidance that you get, it's truly important. But if you're a member of the club, any tier, the free one or the paid one, I'm sure that you will benefit from sharing your experiences in the club, because people will be there for you. So once we went over this, we can start with stage one. So stage one is collecting information and building awareness. Awareness training comes first, and this is an insight that people usually have, like over the years with my clients or in support groups or emails that I get, any kind of um, therapeutic work that I've been doing with BFRBs over the years. This is an insight that people easily come to, and they say, "Oh, I need to be aware of this first," and this is really true. However, when it comes to actually cultivating awareness, very few people devote themselves strategically to this. Uh, the reason why awareness is so important is because when you're aware of what's happening, what your body is doing and feeling, and what your mind is thinking about, you actually discover that you can stop yourself rather easily. But at other times, even if you have a good technique, if you're not aware of what's happening, that technique is effectively useless. So that's why you have to have awareness, because you cannot take the pill if you don't know that you need the pill, right? So that's how it works. Uh, there are, let's say, two ways in which we can talk about awareness. We can talk about it in general terms. And one way to establish that is just to practice mindfulness. And then over time, you will build awareness. You can practice mindfulness informally and then bring awareness into specific situations. For example, if you tend to pull or pick at work, then when you enter your office, make an effort to be mindful, set reminders, post-it notes, alarms, try to work slightly slower so that you become more aware of what's happening and what you're doing. If you pick in the bathroom, before you enter the bathroom, set an active intention to be aware of everything that's happening, and then go in with full awareness. Like that would be a targeted way that doesn't depend on having a mindfulness practice. And start with small chunks. Right. So the best way to start developing awareness, if you don't want to sit and practice mindfulness, and even if you do want, you should still do what I'm about to say, which is that assess how much of your picking or pulling is automatic and how much is focused. And then start selectively being mindful or kind of being aware of those places or situations where your picking or pulling is automatic. When it comes to focused picking or pulling is that kind where you are completely aware of what's happening when you know that you're pulling and when you know that you're picking, right? Automatic is kind of unconscious, it's mindless. I think mindless is maybe even a better word. At some point, you will become aware that you're doing it, and then you will have a choice. You will either stop yourself or it will become focused. And because this mindless and unconscious picking or pulling is kind of the problem for us, because how are you going to replace it if you don't know that you're doing it? That's where you should start cultivating awareness. If your BFRB is unconscious all the time, everywhere, this is rare, but it is not unheard of, then assess where is it that you do most damage and then start there. Because the task of being mindful 24/7 is something that I suspect even the Dalai Lama cannot do. So start with these small chunks. And then when you become aware, move on to the next one. So uh, that would be my recommendation. Also, you might be tempted to start implementing some other techniques as you're doing this, because it might feel like just being aware isn't enough, but it is enough. It's more than enough. It's crucial, in fact. If you do not do awareness training well, everything else is that you do is not going to be as effective. Of that you can be sure. So just resist the temptation to run through this part and move on to something else, right? At the end of the day, this is where you're collecting information that you will use to select appropriate techniques. And so you might be wondering, okay, so I'm doing awareness training, I am building awareness, and I'm collecting information, but what is the information that I should be collecting, right? So here's a list of questions, and you should be able to answer all of these questions for every instance of picking or pulling. This is a very tall order, and it will take time for this. But if we're not going to set good goals for ourselves, then why even try? So it's okay if you need time for this, take the time, right? But understand it. So what do you recognize as an immediate trigger? This is quite important. So it doesn't matter whether you identify something internal or something external. If you look at the extra webinar that I uploaded on the club website, it's about triggers, and you can learn more about what are internal and what are external triggers. But here it doesn't matter which ones. Whatever you recognize. Is it a colleague of yours? Is it thinking about work? Is it feeling sad? Doesn't matter. So whatever it is that you can in the moment recognize as being the trigger, remember that. Write it down somewhere. Put it in an app. Then where are you and who is there with you? So are you at home? Are you in the office? If you're at home, are you in your living room, in the bathroom? Are you alone? If you're not alone, who's there with you? This is important because many people will only pick or pull when they're alone, but some people will do that in front of everyone. And then most frequently, some people would do that in front of people who are close to them, like a partner, husband, wife, a close friend, a child, but not in front of your boss or some complete strangers. So this is going to be very useful information when we move on to steps 3 and 4. But for step 1, it's very useful because it will tell you what kind of a replacement habit you need. You're not going to approach these habits in the same way if you only do this in private or if there are 10 people looking at you, because you want your competing response to be easy to apply, but also you want to make it inconspicuous if there are other people involved. Precisely because of shame, you don't want to add more. There's already enough that comes with having a BFRB. Then what are you feeling before, during, and after? Before would be, if you have to put your emphasis on one, I would say before. Later on, we will, as you go through other steps in future webinars, we will address all of the other ones. But if this is too much for you, then focus on the immediate feeling that you can remember before pulling or picking. So if it's vague, doesn't matter, but make sure to put, if it's hard to put a word on that feeling, describe your impression of it. Like, what do you feel it in your chest, in your abdomen? Is it in your shoulders? Think about feelings in terms of colors. Is it like a dark or a light feeling? Think of some appropriate soundtrack, because music is, at least for me, a very good way of kind of understanding my emotions. So whatever symbol you can attach to it, that's fine. Use that, right? Then what is it that you're thinking about? Again, most importantly, before picking or pulling. And the last, so I was thinking I didn't add some other questions to this, but they will be more important, I think, in step 3. So let's just keep it at this. So you basically have 4 things that you need to collect. So what's the trigger? Where are you and who are you with? What are you feeling and what are you thinking about before picking or pulling, right? Ideally, you will collect information in real time. This is not always possible, of course, but when it's not possible, then write it down as soon as you can. This is especially important for thoughts and feelings because these are very easy to forget. Remember, body-focused repetitive behaviors are very frequently avoidant behaviors. So that means that as soon as you can possibly forget your thoughts and feelings, you will. So therefore, monitoring in real time is quite important. If you have trouble identifying feelings, as I said, don't bother with any conventional labels. Describe what you feel in your body. That's the most important thing. Just a few days ago, I was reading something that people have been writing about in the club, about how some people actually have difficulties differentiating between their thoughts and emotions, and it's kind of like an integral experience. And someone recommended just, write down whatever the experience is like. It doesn't matter whether or not you can cut it apart and say, well, this is an emotion and this is a thought. Ultimately, for us, it's important to understand your experience, not to force any kind of labels on it. So you're making notes, you're writing things down. Review your notes or logs if you're using an app every 3 days, let's say. I say every 3 days. You can do it every 5 days, depending on how much time you give to yourself. But reviewing them daily won't be very helpful. What we're looking for are patterns, and patterns are identified only over time. So you need a couple of days of logs to make sense to look for some kind of a rule there. See what you're struggling to identify, and then zoom in on that in the following days. Let's say you can recognize your thoughts, but you cannot recognize your feelings. Then make feelings the primary thing about self-monitoring. The whole step 1 of habit reversal is a practical thing. If you can answer, here's the list of questions. If you can answer 3 out of 4 questions, then my God, don't enter the information again. Focus on what's difficult to identify, because the idea is to expand your awareness and to get information that you can analyze. So there's no need to write down the same information over and over again. Focus on what's missing and then do that. Otherwise, this stage will last forever. You can obviously repeat the whole process as many times as you need. It's not like habit reversal can never be repeated. So if you notice another pattern of picking that you or pulling that you didn't identify previously, you can always go back to the beginning and start the whole process again. But when you're doing it, be strategic and be practical. There will be time for us to go deeper and look at these very profound issues and be spiritual and whatever you want. But now, habit reversal, very down to earth thing. So once you're able to answer all the questions from the list that I provided, then you can say that this stage is over and that you can move on to the next stage. Second stage is analyzing data and choosing replacement habits. So in this stage, I mean, as the name says, you're kind of incorporating or starting to incorporate replacement habits. One of the habits that I haven't incorporated is using a spell check, as you can see. We call these replacement habits competing responses. The word itself kind of tells you what it's all about. It is a response that competes with BFRB. So it is a response that competes with picking or with pulling. And the whole step 2 is about patience and discipline, precisely because it takes time and sustained and strategic effort to make these habitual enough. Because if you've been pulling for 5 years or 20 years, your pulling has that many years as a habit, ahead of something that you're just implementing now. So we will work on this more, but I kind of have to repeat this because this is maybe the most common error that I see, is that people think that a competing response will be natural and normal after a couple of weeks. It's not going to happen. It will require conscious effort. So think about that as well. Selecting an appropriate technique is not always easy. Most people have the tendency to select whatever is simple to them, or whatever they think would be cool or look cool, or however they imagine that the solution should be. If you're kind of stuck on a technique because it looks nice or sounds interesting, just forget it. The rule of thumb is that you use those techniques that will help you cover as much ground as humanly possible. So we base the choice of technique on the data that you've collected, which is why it's an analysis that should be done with a cool head. So, and we want to choose few techniques. We don't want 25 replacement habits. We want 1 or 2 or 3 if necessary, but we don't want 10. That's my point. So data analysis is what you base your choice of technique on. If your BFRB is present in front of other people, just to give you an example how you use the data, then you look more into more discrete competing responses. Then you're not going to be, I don't know, playing with a huge fidget toy. You might want to use a spinner ring. Or instead of, if you want to wear gloves, that's not technically speaking a competing response, but let's not get into technical things here. You might not want to do that in front of your boss, but you can do a breathing exercise because your boss can't see that. So where you are and with whom you are, it determines your choice of technique. If you pick or pull when you're alone, then discretion isn't really that important. And then you have a wider choice of techniques. Then just go for whatever is effective. You don't need to be balancing anything. You just go for what works. If you pick or pull in your sleep, which doesn't happen frequently, but it is something that I have seen, or if you do that when you're tired, you may want to choose something that requires less willingness. So you may want to focus on gloves or band-aids or finger covers, or wearing long sleeves if you pick your hands, or wearing, how do you call those, swim caps on your head so that you cannot touch your hairs. So something that doesn't require active effort, but that instead prevents you from actually picking or pulling. So that would be technically called a stimulus control. But really, for the purposes of using this as self-help, you don't have to bother with these distinctions. If you feel uncomfortable about a specific technique, this is not the reason not to try it. I have to say this again. If you feel uncomfortable, it's not the reason to not try a technique. A classical example are gloves. Everyone hates using gloves, and yet they're some of the most efficient techniques that I have seen. So if you don't like the way it looks, if you think it'll be uncomfortable, if you start making excuses like my hands will be hot, as if all gloves are made out of unpleasant materials, Google them and you'll find gloves that are touch screen friendly, that your skin can breathe through, you know, just many of them. So just try when you catch yourself finding excuses like that, try to stop yourself and do it anyway. I didn't list any I didn't list any specific competing responses here, because you can find just a few days ago I posted a list of over 200 different substitution techniques on the club blog. So you can find this, and I will link to this in the description of this video if you're watching this on YouTube and not on the website. And if you're if you're currently logged into the club, just go to the blogs section and you will find this huge list. If you have anything to add to the list, like use the comment section below, and I will update the document so that we can have this huge database of things for you to try out. If you don't know where to try out, see with other club members. They might be able to help you. So that's the second stage. You basically analyze the data that you've collected, and then you identify where you need to use competing responses and then which ones are the best to try. At the end of stage 2, it's very useful if you have a list of, let's say, 5 or 6. As I said, we're not going to use all 5 and 6, but it is important to have a list of possible responses. Okay. So as you start stage 3, implementation, how this stage will work depends on how you did in stage 1 or how much awareness you have. So you might also want to add those awareness techniques if you can manage into this stage, just to kind of expand your awareness even a little bit if possible. I said that awareness training is kind of a pivotal moment in the treatment, and that was true. And implementation is the second important thing, or rather, the discipline to implement, to apply this stage. Because with this stage, the problem is mainly that people give up or use it, or just kind of use their tools intermittently. And this stage is not called use it sometimes, it's called implementation. So it's something that needs to again be done strategically and daily. I cannot stress this enough. So you have your list. Take a look at your list and then select just one. The one you think will be applicable in most situations where you pick or pull. Leave everything else on the list aside, at least for now, and then start with this one. Practice regularly, even if you don't feel the urge to pick or pull. Again, I said just a few minutes ago, so I don't have to repeat myself why this is important, but there is no other way to establish a habit except repetition, an intentional repetition. You can practice depending on what response you choose. You can practice it all the time, or you can devote some time to practice. Like if you need to practice in front of the TV, you can use your competing response for as long as you're in front of the TV. But if you pick or pull in your office, then you might want to devote 5 minutes 3 or 4 times a day in the office and just use your competing response. In addition, of course, whenever you notice the urge, immediately reach for your competing response. But the point is to practice whenever you're in a risky situation. because again, repetition is the only way to establish a new habit. As you go through this process, please take notes. Take notes about whatever comes to your mind. Journal pages and pages. It doesn't matter if it's coherent, it doesn't matter if you understand it at the time, but take notes. Because you don't have a therapist to bounce your ideas off of, you need a place to store your thoughts. Some things that you should probably write down about the technique that you select is where does it work, where it doesn't work, because rarely do we find one technique that works everywhere. And so it has its range of functionality, and we need to understand what that is. Then where you resist using it, thoughts that you have when you need it, especially if these thoughts are about resistance. Resistance is an important phenomenon, and we will be coming back to it in stages 2, 3, and 4. So make a lot of notes about this. What are the excuses that you give yourself? What is it that you say to yourself? So to justify pulling or picking, what's the argument that you fall for, right? Just write that down. And then, of course, feelings, always feelings. Information about feelings is crucial, because the more you pay attention to your feelings, the more we'll have to work with in later stages of the program. And also, when you spend time looking at your feelings, you're building up tolerance to them. And that means that you will have less need to avoid them. So that alone will help you, or at least strengthen your efforts to reduce picking or pulling. Right? So I'm not saying this because by default therapists like to contemplate feelings. It's because it is practically quite important. Give each technique 3 to 5 days at least, and then assess it based on your notes. So not based on how you feel about a technique, whether you enjoyed using it or whether it feels the same. The point is not for something to feel the same as picking or pulling. The point is for it to effectively replace the behavior. Remember, we're in this stage, in this step, we're talking about replacing behaviors, not replicating their feeling, how they make you feel. If your chosen technique has about 50% efficiency, keep it, because it works half of the time. That means that in that, let's say, 3 to 5 days that you've been using it, that you have picked or pulled 50% less. That is incredible. So keep that technique and then choose another one that will work in, I don't know, 10, 20% of the cases, and then test that one as well. At the same time, you have to continue diligently using the first one. If its efficiency is below 50%, you may want to replace it, unless it is context specific. So, for example, some techniques might be excellent at work, and they may work very well in your office, but then they might not work in the living room, they might not work in the car, they might not work in the bathroom. And overall, they will be less than 50% efficient. However, in that one specific context, they might be highly, highly efficient. So keep them, because then you've taken care of this whole space where you pick or pull and where you spend at least 8 hours a day, if we stick to the office example, right? So don't, all rules apply, as one of my meditation teachers said, unless they don't apply. So in this case, this is a rule of thumb, not the word of God. So this is my recommendation, but you don't have to follow it if there's a good reason not to follow it. And then establish a reward system. Research tells us, and we can have a webinar on this if you want and if you need one, on how to establish habits effectively. I will address it a little bit in step 2, but research tells us that our brains learn, or at least remember, much better if they get validation versus if they get invalidation. And the reason for this is that invalidation is not exactly very useful. It's kind of like that inner critic that we talked about in the webinar last month. If someone tells you you're a failure, that's not exactly very useful feedback. It's much better to say, you could improve in this particular area, and here's how, right? Imagine if you needed instructions on how to get to a certain place. So you're looking for a store and you're going down the street, and somehow you live in a world where cell phones and GPS don't exist. So you need to ask people. And then you ask someone how to get to your destination, and then they tell you, just go straight until the crossroad and then don't go left. That's how invalidation works. Invalidation tells you don't do this, but that crossroad has maybe right and straight ahead, and then you have no idea where to actually go. So you know what not to do, but you don't know what to do, and that is not exactly very conducive to learning, you know. So our brains work much better when you tell them you've done a good job, repeat this. And that's what a reward system does. A reward system sends the message to your brain, this was excellent, keep it coming. I suggest implementing 3 types of reward systems. Again, we will talk about this in step 2 in more detail, but this is just to get you started. um, because if you follow my plan, you will be in the implementation stage when the next webinar comes up. So you'll need it at a time. But just roughly speaking, you should establish a reward for a day without picking or pulling. So 1 day, a reward for 3 days or a week, whatever seems most realistic to you, and then a reward for 2 weeks. And each subsequent reward should be more meaningful to you. Like a reward for a day without picking or pulling should be something simple. Like if you have some kind of a guilty pleasure that you like indulge in, like, I don't know, like fast food or something sweet, or I don't know, watch a trashy show, then give yourself that when you have a day without picking or pulling, right? And then for 3 days or a week, do something bigger. And then for 2 weeks, really reward yourself with something meaningful. So that way you're sending a message to your brain that whatever it is that's being done is good and it should be continued. And this will significantly facilitate your habit formation. So you will make your competing response into a habit much faster. The time required for this, as I said, is at least 1 month. 1 to 2 months is, I think, realistic if you don't rush through all of it. And if you rush through all of it, it's not going to work anyway. So just stick with this timeline, more or less. So you'll need 1 or 2 weeks for self-monitoring, for building awareness and collecting information. Then you'll need 1 or 2 days only to analyze the data and decide what techniques you want to use. And then more or less, you'll need a week of practice per technique to know whether it's actually a useful technique. So if the first week you have 60% efficiency with a technique, and then next week you find a technique that works, let's say, in 25% of the cases that are not covered by the first technique, overall that's 75%. That's remarkable. That's excellent. So even that would require 2 weeks, right? So that stage of implementation, or kind of trying out and assessing techniques, can stretch out a little bit, but it is worth approaching it strategically. It's not going to be too long if you just follow the model that I gave you, because this model is clear and it's tactical and it works very well. And then after you are done with this, when you're covered with the necessary techniques and you start practicing them daily, the next step is to further develop your discipline, to continue with repetition, to develop patience, and to work on self-compassion, which is what we will talk about in step 2 next month. This is everything I had for you. So thank you for listening. Remember, you can, if you're a member of the VIP Lounge, you can use the Ask Away link to submit any questions that you have, and I will either create a video response as a Q&A, or I will write a lengthy blog post, depending on how many questions I get and how much talking they require. Other than asking questions about the webinar content, if you have any other questions, just select the appropriate. There are several types of questions you can ask, and I will respond to all VIP Lounge clients. Thank you very much for listening, and I'm looking forward to hearing your feedback, and I'm looking forward to seeing how you implement this in real life.